Some shiny Pokémon are rare not because of luck alone, but because history itself made them almost impossible to obtain. The core concept of a shiny Pokémon is a matter of pure probability. Typically, obtaining one relies on standard odds of 1 in 8,192 in older games, or 1 in 4,096 in modern titles. However, the truly rare shiny Pokémon are those whose scarcity is defined not by the odds alone, but by historical circumstance, limited access, and an opportunity that history itself closed forever. Shiny Mew is widely regarded as one of the rarest legitimate Pokémon ever obtainable, not because of its design or battle strength, but because of the extremely narrow window through which it could be acquired, and the sheer improbability required for it to appear in its alternate coloration. Unlike most shiny Pokémon that can be hunted repeatedly through resets, breeding, or modern odds manipulation, Shiny Mew's rarity comes from a unique combination of limited distribution, strict hardware requirements, and full odds probability that could not be meaningfully optimized at the time. In Pokemon Emerald, Mew was not obtainable through normal gameplay. Instead, it was locked behind an event-exclusive item known as the Old Sea Map, which was only distributed in Japan during a very limited real-world event in 2005. This item allowed players to travel to Faraway Island, an otherwise inaccessible location hidden deep within the game's data. Outside of this event, the Old Sea Map was never released again, never localized outside Japan, and never officially redistributed through later remakes or virtual console versions of Emerald. That single decision immediately made all legitimate Emerald Mew encounters extraordinarily rare, even for players who attended the event and obtained the Old Sea Map. The process was far from complete. Faraway Island itself is a strange and unsettling location, featuring a maze-like field of tall grass with a small pink Pokémon visible in the distance. As the player approaches, Mew moves away, forcing a slow pursuit across the island. This scripted behavior is unique among mythical Pokémon encounters, and it reinforces the sense that Mew is not meant to be easily captured or controlled. Only after navigating the grass correctly does the battle finally begin. At this point, the odds become the true barrier. In Pokemon Emerald, shiny odds are fixed at 1 in 8,192. There is no shiny charm, no Masuda method, no chain fishing, and no modern quality of life mechanics to improve the probability. The encounter is a single static legendary style battle, meaning that players must soft reset the game repeatedly if they want to attempt a shiny hunt. Each reset requires rebooting the Game Boy Advance, loading the save file, navigating to Faraway Island, and re-triggering the encounter sequence. This process alone can take several minutes per attempt, making each individual shiny roll slow and mentally exhausting. What makes Shiny Mew especially punishing is that Pokemon Emerald's random number generation is notoriously difficult to manipulate naturally. Unlike other Generation 3 games, Emerald uses a broken RNG seed that does not advance in the same predictable way when soft resetting. This means that players attempting to shiny hunt Mew without advanced knowledge or external tools could unknowingly be hitting the same non-shiny frames over and over again. For many years, this made legitimate shiny hunting in Emerald far more difficult than in Ruby or Sapphire. As a result, many early attempts to obtain shiny Mew were abandoned entirely. Players simply did not know that Emerald's RNG behaved differently and assumed they were unlucky rather than functionally stuck. It wasn't until years later that dedicated researchers in the Pokemon community fully documented Emerald's RNG mechanics and developed precise timing-based methods to hit different frames. Even then, executing these methods requires extreme precision, specific hardware conditions, and often external timing tools. This means that even today, obtaining a legitimate shiny Mew from Emerald remains one of the most technically demanding shiny hunts in the franchise. The shiny Mew itself is visually subtle but unmistakable. Its normal pink coloration shifts to a soft, pale blue, giving it an almost ethereal appearance. Unlike many shinies that feature dramatic color swaps, Shiny Mew's palette feels intentional and gentle, reinforcing its mysterious nature rather than overpowering it. The blue tone matches Mew's playful yet ancient identity, making it one of the most aesthetically respected shiny forms in the entire series. From a legitimacy standpoint, Shiny Mew is heavily scrutinized. Because Mew is a mythical Pokémon and has been shiny locked in nearly every modern appearance, almost all Shiny Mew found in circulation today are hacked or illegitimate. In fact, the only widely accepted legitimate Shiny Mew encounters come from the Japanese Emerald Old Sea Map event. Later distributions of Mew, such as those in Fire Red and Leaf Green, through glitches, in Pokemon Go events, or through modern mystery gifts, either shiny lock the Pokemon or do not allow the shiny variant at all. This has made verification extremely important. Legitimate Shiny Mew from Emerald must match very specific criteria, including origin game, language, encounter location, and internal data values. Even minor discrepancies can reveal a hacked specimen. As a result, collectors and competitive communities treat confirmed, legitimate Shiny Mew as museum-grade Pokémon, not tools for battle, but artifacts of gaming history. Because Faraway Island was Japan exclusive, legitimate Shiny Mew are also region-locked by default. While it is technically possible to trade Japanese Pokémon internationally, the original acquisition still required physical presence or access to the event in Japan during a narrow window. This further reduces the number of real Shiny Mew that could ever exist. Unlike modern events that reach millions of players globally, the old CMAP was distributed to a comparatively tiny audience. Over the years, Shiny Mew has become symbolic of an era of Pokemon design that no longer exists. It represents a time when mythical Pokemon were truly mythical, hidden, obscure, and difficult to obtain even for the most dedicated players. There were no guaranteed distributions, no mass internet downloads, and no second chances. If you missed the event, the opportunity was gone forever. This exclusivity is precisely why Shiny Mew remains one of the most coveted Pokemon of all time. Its value is not measured in competitive viability or raw power, but in rarity, authenticity, and historical context. It is a Pokemon that almost no one was meant to have, and even fewer were meant to have in its shiny form. In modern Pokemon discussions, Shiny Mew often serves as a benchmark for rarity. When new shiny hunts are introduced, players frequently ask whether they rival Emerald Shiny Mew in difficulty. Almost none do. Even the hardest modern hunts benefit from improved odds, repeatable methods, or global accessibility. Shiny Mew had none of those advantages. It also occupies a unique emotional space for longtime fans. Many players remember seeing images or videos of Shiny Mew online years before they ever understood how impossible it truly was to obtain. For some, it was the first time they realized that not all Pokemon content was meant to be accessible to everyone. That realization helped shape the mystique of the franchise and deepened the sense of wonder surrounding its rarest creatures. Today, Shiny Mew stands as a reminder of Pokemon's early design philosophy, one that prioritized mystery over accessibility and rarity over fairness. It is not a Pokemon defined by stats, moves, or lore alone, but by circumstance. Its existence is tied to a specific place, a specific time, and a specific group of players who happened to be there when history quietly happened. And because of that, Shiny Mew is not just rare, it is irreplaceable. Deoxys is one of the most unusual Pokemon ever discovered, not just in how it looks or battles, but in how it came into existence at all. According to Pokemon lore, Deoxys originated from a virus that came from deep space, exposed to a laser beam, and mutated into a sentient life form. Unlike most Pokemon that evolved through natural selection on Earth, Deoxys is explicitly extraterrestrial, making it one of the few Pokemon whose origin is completely off-world. This alone already places Deoxys in rare territory, but when you narrow that focus to its shiny form, the rarity reaches an entirely different level. In Pokemon Emerald, Deoxys could only be encountered on Birth Island, a small, mysterious landmass, accessible exclusively through a limited-time event item known as the Aurora Ticket. This item was never obtainable through normal gameplay. It was distributed only during specific real-world events, often in limited regions, with many players never receiving access at all. Without the Aurora Ticket, Birth Island simply could not be reached under legitimate means. This immediately restricts the pool of possible encounters, even before considering shiny odds. Once a player arrived on Birth Island, Deoxys was not simply waiting to be battled. Instead, it was part of one of the most cryptic puzzles in the franchise. The island featured a black triangular stone that would move across the ground when interacted with. Each correct interaction caused the triangle to shift position, slowly forming a pattern. Only after completing the puzzle correctly would Deoxys finally reveal itself. This meant that even reaching the encounter required patience, attention, and an understanding of the puzzle mechanics, something many players found confusing or intimidating at the time. When Deoxys finally appeared, there were no advantages to shiny hunting it. Pokemon Emerald did not have a shiny charm. There were no increased odds, no chain mechanics, and no shortcuts. The odds of encountering a shiny Deoxys were the standard Generation 3 full odds, 1 in 8,192. Every reset required replaying the puzzle, navigating the island, and initiating the battle again. Each attempt took time, making the hunt not only rare, but extremely demanding. What makes Shiny Deoxys especially notable is that it was not shiny locked in Pokemon Emerald. This was a unique window in Pokemon history. In later generations, Deoxys would almost always be shiny locked, meaning its shiny form could not be obtained through legitimate means. This makes the Emerald version one of the only opportunities ever given to players to hunt shiny Deoxys legally. Once that window closed, it never truly reopened. Visually, shiny Deoxys is subtle but unmistakable. Its usual red and teal color palette shifts into a striking yellow and green hue, giving it an almost alien glow. The color change reinforces its extraterrestrial origin, making it look even more unnatural and otherworldly. Unlike some shinies that feel cosmetic, shiny Deoxys looks like an entirely different organism, as if the mutation that created it had gone just slightly differently. Deoxys is also unique in that it has multiple forms, each representing a different combat specialization: normal form, attack form, defense form, and speed form. In Pokemon Emerald, Deoxys defaults to its normal form, but its other forms became more prominent in later games. The shiny coloration remains consistent across all forms, meaning that regardless of how it transforms, the rarity and visual identity of the shiny remains intact. This consistency has made shiny Deoxys especially iconic among collectors and competitive players alike. From a gameplay perspective, Deoxys is infamous for its extreme stat distributions. Attack form possesses one of the highest attack stats ever seen, while defense form trades offense for near impenetrable bulk. Speed form is blisteringly fast, capable of outspeeding almost every Pokémon in existence. This versatility makes Deoxys fascinating, but it also adds emotional weight to shiny hunting it. No matter which form it eventually takes, a shiny Deoxys is always valuable, both mechanically and symbolically. The legitimacy of shiny Deoxys is one of the most scrutinized topics in Pokémon collecting. Because the Aurora ticket was so limited, and because Deoxys was shiny locked in later games, many shiny Deoxys circulating today are illegitimate. This has elevated verified Emerald Origin shiny Deoxys to legendary status. Collectors look for very specific traits: correct Met location, correct game of origin, correct PID values, and proper transfer history. A fully legitimate shiny Deoxys from Emerald is often considered one of the crown jewels of any Pokémon collection. Another layer of rarity comes from the fact that Pokémon Emerald's RNG system is notoriously difficult to manipulate correctly without deep technical knowledge. While some players have mastered RNG manipulation to obtain shinies deterministically, doing so in Emerald requires precise timing, understanding frame counts, and careful setup. Even with that knowledge, executing it successfully for Deoxys is far from trivial. For players who hunted it through pure soft resets, the achievement is even more staggering. Deoxys also holds a unique place in Pokémon lore beyond the games. In the anime and movies, Deoxys is portrayed as mysterious, powerful, and emotionally distant. It communicates in strange ways and often struggles to understand human concepts. This portrayal aligns perfectly with the idea of shiny hunting it, a long, lonely process, often done in silence, waiting for something rare to appear from the void. Many players describe finally encountering shiny Deoxys as surreal, almost unreal, after thousands of failed attempts. Unlike many legendary Pokémon that are deeply tied to myths or ancient civilizations, Deoxys represents science fiction within the Pokémon universe. It is a reminder that Pokémon lore is not just fantasy, but also cosmic and speculative. Shiny Deoxys, in particular, feels like encountering something that was never meant to be seen, a statistical anomaly from beyond the stars. The difficulty of hunting shiny Deoxys has made it a rite of passage among dedicated shiny hunters. It is often cited alongside shiny Mew, shiny Jirachi, and shiny Manaphy as one of the ultimate tests of patience. Some players have documented hunts lasting years, with tens of thousands of resets before success. Others never succeed at all, eventually retiring the hunt without ever seeing the golden green glow appear. Because Deoxys cannot breed, cannot be encountered repeatedly through normal routes, and cannot be rehunted in modern games, every legitimate shiny Deoxys represents a closed chapter in Pokémon history. Once Pokémon moved toward widespread shiny locking of mythical Pokémon, the opportunity disappeared. This makes Emerald Origin shiny Deoxys not just rare, but historically finite. In the modern Pokémon community, shiny Deoxys is often discussed with a sense of reverence. It is not flashy in the way some shinies are, but its story carries immense weight. It represents a time when Pokémon events were mysterious, when information was scarce, and when players discovered secrets through word of mouth rather than data mines. Hunting it meant committing to the unknown, without guarantees or conveniences. When viewed in the context of the rarest shinies ever obtainable, shiny Deoxys stands as one of the most legitimate claims to the title. Its rarity is not artificial, not the result of exclusivity alone, but a combination of limited access, full odds, mechanical difficulty, and permanent shiny locks in later generations. Every factor aligns to make it extraordinarily uncommon. And when you imagine that moment, the screen flashing, the colors shifting, the alien form appearing in unfamiliar hues, it feels like witnessing a glitch in reality. A cosmic accident, preserved in pixels, waiting quietly on Birth Island for someone patient enough to find it. Rayquaza's rarity begins not with its design, but with its location. High above the Hoenn region, resting at the summit of Sky Pillar, Rayquaza exists far from the routes, towns, and trainers that fill most Pokemon journeys. Reaching it requires deliberate effort, precise movement, and patience even before the encounter begins. In Pokemon Emerald, Sky Pillar is not a place meant for casual exploration. The cracked floors demand careful navigation using the Mach Bike, and a single mistake sends the player falling through levels of ancient stone. Long before Rayquaza appears on screen, the game quietly tests the player's resolve. When Rayquaza finally descends from the sky, there are no second chances built into the encounter. There is no shiny charm. There are no boosted odds. There are no scripted re-encounters. The shiny odds are the original full odds of 1 in 8,192. Every reset is a complete return to the title screen. Every attempt requires navigating Sky Pillar again, riding the fragile bike across collapsing floors, climbing back to the summit, and initiating the battle from scratch. This alone places shiny Rayquaza among the most time-consuming legendary hunts ever designed. What elevates Rayquaza's rarity even further is the generation it originates from. In Generation 3, shininess is tied to internal personality values rather than visual indicators before battle. There is no sparkle sound cue until the encounter actually begins. There is no modern visual shorthand to alert the player instantly. Each encounter demands full attention. Thousands of resets can blur together, hours passing with nothing but green scales and disappointment. When the black and gold shiny Rayquaza finally appears, the moment feels unreal, not because of surprise, but because of exhaustion. Rayquaza's shiny coloration itself adds to its legendary status. Unlike subtle shinies that shift only a shade or tone, shiny Rayquaza undergoes a complete transformation. Its emerald green body becomes jet black, traced with glowing golden rings that echo ancient symbols and celestial markings. The contrast is stark and unmistakable. It looks less like a creature and more like an omen, something unnatural, something not meant to be seen often. This dramatic visual change has made shiny Rayquaza one of the most iconic shinies in Pokemon history, instantly recognizable even to those unfamiliar with the franchise. In Pokemon Emerald, Rayquaza is not shiny locked. That fact alone makes the hunt technically possible, but not forgiving. Emerald introduced a unique random number generation system that behaves differently from other Generation 3 games. Without precise manipulation, random encounters can unintentionally repeat the same values, meaning some players unknowingly lock themselves into seeing the same non-shiny Rayquaza over and over again. This quirk has caused many legitimate hunts to fail silently, adding another layer of difficulty that only later became fully understood. Despite these challenges, Rayquaza became one of the most hunted shinies of all time, not because it was easy, but because it represented something pure. A hunt that relied on nothing but persistence. No events, no distributions, no special items, just patience, repetition, and luck. Every legitimate shiny Rayquaza from Emerald represents thousands of attempts, countless hours, and a level of dedication that few other Pokemon require. Later generations would introduce shiny locks for many legendary Pokemon, changing the landscape of shiny hunting forever. Rayquaza would eventually receive shiny distributions through events, mega evolution forms, and modern games with increased odds. But those later versions do not diminish the rarity of the original. A shiny Rayquaza caught naturally at Sky Pillar in Pokemon Emerald remains one of the most respected trophies in the Pokemon community, not because of how it looks, but because of what it represents. There is also something fitting about Rayquaza's rarity. In lore, Rayquaza is a guardian of balance, descending only when the world itself is at risk. It does not live among humans. It does not wander the land. It waits in the sky, watching silently. Its shiny form feels like an extension of that idea, a version of Rayquaza that exists almost outside probability, appearing only for those who wait long enough, climb high enough, and refuse to give up. Stories of successful Emerald Shiny Rayquaza hunts often read like endurance tests rather than celebrations. Players describe months of resets, thousands of attempts, and moments of doubt where quitting felt inevitable. When the shiny finally appeared, many froze afraid to move, afraid to fail the capture, afraid the moment would disappear. Some Master Balls were saved for years for that single encounter. Others relied on careful weakening and status moves, knowing that one mistake could erase everything. Unlike event shinies that arrive guaranteed, Rayquaza's Emerald Shiny has no safety net. There is no reclaim if the game crashes, no backup save, no reissue. If it flees, faints, or the system fails, it is gone forever. That permanence is part of what gives the Pokemon its weight. Each legitimate shiny Rayquaza is tied to a single cartridge, a single save file, and a single moment that cannot be replicated. Even today, when players discuss the rarest shinies ever obtained, Emerald Shiny Rayquaza remains near the top of every list. It stands alongside Shiny Deoxys, Shiny Mew, and Shiny Manaphy Pokemon, whose rarity is defined not just by odds, but by circumstance. Rayquaza's hunt is pure probability, paired with physical effort, mechanical difficulty, and psychological endurance. In a franchise that has grown more accessible over time, Rayquaza's Emerald Shiny feels like a relic from a harsher era when rarity was uncompromising and rewards were earned through repetition rather than design convenience. It represents a time when Pokemon did not explain itself, did not guide the player, and did not guarantee success. And when the screen finally flashes, when the music begins, and when Rayquaza descends in black and gold instead of green, the moment is quiet. There is no fanfare, no achievement notification, just a subtle sparkle and the realization that something extraordinarily unlikely has just occurred. That silence is what makes Shiny Rayquaza unforgettable. Shiny Celebi is often considered one of the most quietly rare Pokemon ever legitimately obtainable. Not because of extreme difficulty in battle or complex mechanics, but because of how narrow and specific the circumstances were that allowed it to exist at all. Celebi itself is already a mythical Pokemon tied closely to time, forests, and the Johto region, but its shiny form adds an additional layer of rarity that feels almost accidental, as though it slipped through a closing door before it was sealed forever. Originally, Celebi was never meant to be obtainable in Pokemon Crystal outside of special distributions. In the early days of Pokemon, mythical Pokemon like Celebi were typically locked behind real-world events, often limited to Japan. For years, players outside of Japan had no official way to encounter Celebi at all. Even in Japan, Celebi was usually distributed directly, meaning players never had a chance to encounter it naturally in-game, let alone attempt to hunt a shiny version. That changed in an unexpected way with the release of Pokemon Crystal on the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console. Unlike later generations, Generation 2 Pokemon games did not originally include shiny locks. Shininess was determined purely by Pokemon personality values, and any Pokemon that could be encountered could, in theory, be shiny. When Game Freak re-released Pokemon Crystal on the Virtual Console, they made a decision that would unknowingly create one of the rarest shiny hunts in the franchise. In the Japanese version of Pokemon Crystal Virtual Console, players were able to unlock the GS Ball event natively within the game. This event allowed players to travel to Ilex Forest and encounter Celebi directly, without requiring a real-world distribution. This was monumental, because for the first time ever, Celebi could be encountered as a stationary Pokemon encounter in a mainline game. Because Pokemon Crystal predates shiny locks, this Celebi encounter was not shiny locked. That single design decision made it possible to legitimately hunt shiny Celebi at full odds. Those odds were 1 in 8,192, the standard shiny rate for Generation 2. There was no shiny charm, no Masuda method, no chain mechanics, and no shortcuts. Players had to save in front of the shrine in Ilex Forest and soft reset over and over again, hoping that when Celebi appeared, it would sparkle. What made this hunt even rarer was accessibility. The GS Ball event was only available in the Japanese version of Pokemon Crystal on the Virtual Console. International releases of Pokemon Crystal did not include the event by default. This meant that to even attempt the hunt, players needed a Japanese Nintendo account, access to the Japanese eShop before its closure, and knowledge of how to navigate the game in Japanese. For many players, that alone was a barrier too high to cross. Even among those who could access the game, the hunt itself was grueling. Celebi's encounter animation is slow, and soft resetting in Pokemon Crystal takes longer than in modern games. Each attempt required patience, consistency, and a willingness to repeat the same quiet ritual thousands of times. There was no visual indicator until Celebi fully appeared on screen, meaning each reset demanded attention and focus. Adding to the rarity is the fact that Celebi, as a mythical Pokemon, has been shiny locked in almost every other appearance. In later generations, event-distributed Celebi could not be shiny. This makes the Pokemon Crystal Virtual Console Celebi one of the only legitimate ways to ever obtain a shiny Celebi at all. Because of this, every legitimate shiny Celebi that exists today can be traced back to a very small window in time and a very specific version of the game. Once the Nintendo 3DS eShop closed, access to Pokemon Crystal Virtual Console effectively ended. No new copies can be downloaded legitimately, and no new GS Ball events can be accessed unless the game was already installed. That means the number of possible legitimate shiny Celebi encounters is permanently capped. From a lore perspective, shiny Celebi feels especially fitting. Celebi is known as the time travel Pokemon, capable of moving freely through past and future. Its shiny coloration, which shifts its usual pink accents into a deeper, more autumn-like palette, gives it an aged, timeless appearance. Many fans describe shiny Celebi as looking older, wiser, and more ancient than its standard form, which aligns beautifully with its role as a guardian of time and forests. In Johto mythology, Celebi is said to appear only when forests are in danger or when time itself needs correcting. The idea that its shiny form is so rare that only a handful of people may ever see it feels intentional, even if it was purely a technical result of early game design. It reinforces the sense that encountering a shiny Celebi is not just luck, but a moment that was never meant to be common. Because shiny Celebi originates from a Generation 2 game, it also carries unique traits. Its stats, moves, and data structure are shaped by older mechanics, making transferred versions of it particularly interesting in later generations. When moved forward through Pokemon Bank and Pokemon Home, Shiny Celebi retains its legitimacy markers, allowing collectors to verify its origin. This has made legitimate Shiny Celebi one of the most scrutinized Pokemon in trading communities. Illegitimate versions exist, of course, but experienced collectors can often tell the difference. The real ones have a story behind them, months of resetting, navigating a foreign language, and committing to a hunt with no guarantee of success. That story is part of what makes Shiny Celebi so valuable, even beyond its rarity. In many ways, Shiny Celebi represents a bygone era of Pokemon, a time when shiny hunting was slower, quieter, and more personal. There were no online guides optimized for efficiency, no counters tracking encounters automatically, and no social media clips showcasing success instantly. It was just the player, the forest shrine, and the hope that one reset would finally be different. That stillness is why Shiny Celebi fits so perfectly into a long-form video like this. It isn't flashy. It doesn't roar or dominate battles. Its rarity comes from patience and time, the very things it represents. A Shiny Celebi doesn't announce itself loudly. It appears softly, briefly, and only to those willing to wait. And somewhere, frozen in a save file from a Japanese copy of Pokemon Crystal, a Shiny Celebi still waits at the Ilex Forest Shrine, untouched, its sparkle unseen, resting quietly at the intersection of chance and time. Shiny Manaphy occupies a unique and almost legendary position among rare Pokemon, not because of where it appears, but because of how it must be obtained. Unlike most mythical Pokemon, Manaphy cannot be shiny when first received. Instead, its rarity is defined by a complex chain of events involving multiple games, hardware limitations, and a single irreversible opportunity per save file. This unusual method has made Shiny Manaphy one of the most difficult and least encountered legitimate shinies in the entire franchise. Manaphy was first introduced in Generation 4, debuting through the Pokemon Ranger series rather than the mainline games. In Pokemon Ranger, players could complete a special mission that rewarded a Manaphy egg. However, this egg could not hatch within Pokemon Ranger itself. Instead, it had to be transferred to a Generation 4 main series game, such as Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum, using a one-time transfer feature. This transfer was limited to a single egg per Pokemon Ranger cartridge, meaning once the egg was sent, the opportunity was permanently gone. What makes Shiny Manaphy especially unusual is that the shiny determination does not occur when the egg is received in Pokemon Ranger. Instead, the egg itself is locked to always appear normal while in Ranger, but the Pokemon inside the egg is generated when it hatches in the mainline game. This means the shininess is determined by the trainer ID and secret ID of the receiving save file, not by the egg itself. As a result, the only way to hunt Shiny Manaphy was to hatch the egg on a fresh save file repeatedly, checking whether the resulting Manaphy was shiny. This process created one of the most punishing shiny hunts ever designed. Players who wanted to hunt Shiny Manaphy legitimately had to reset their Pokemon Ranger cartridge repeatedly, complete the required mission again, transfer the egg to a brand new Diamond Pearl or Platinum save file, and then hatch the egg. If the Manaphy was not shiny, the entire process had to be repeated from the very beginning. There was no way to soft reset for the shiny, and there was no way to reuse the same egg on the same save file. The odds themselves made the process even more daunting. In Generation 4, the base shiny odds were 1 in 8,192. There was no shiny charm, no Masuda method, and no manipulation tools built into the game. Each attempt was a full odds roll, combined with hours of setup work just to reach a single hatch. For many players, this meant investing dozens of hours for a single chance, only to be met with disappointment most of the time. Because of this, very few players ever attempted the hunt legitimately. Even fewer succeeded. Many legitimate shiny Manaphy sightings come from collectors who spent years carefully planning the hunt, often using multiple copies of Pokemon Ranger and multiple mainline cartridges to maximize their attempts. Some collectors documented hundreds of hours spent for just one successful shiny hatch. This immense time investment has elevated shiny Manaphy beyond simple rarity and into the realm of dedication-based legends within the Pokemon community. Another factor that contributes to shiny Manaphy's rarity is the widespread misunderstanding of its mechanics. Many players mistakenly believe that Manaphy is shiny locked, when in reality it is not. However, because the only legal shiny method is so obscure and punishing, most shiny Manaphy seen online are illegitimate. This has made verification extremely important among collectors. Legitimate shiny Manaphy must originate from Generation 4 and show correct transfer data, met locations, and hatching information consistent with the Ranger Egg method. Manaphy's design further adds to the mystique of its shiny form. Normally, Manaphy has a light blue body with gentle aquatic tones that reflect its status as a sea-born mythical Pokemon. Its shiny form subtly shifts these colors into deeper shades of blue, giving it a calmer, more muted appearance. The difference is not dramatic, but it is noticeable to those familiar with the species. This understated transformation fits Manaphy's peaceful nature, emphasizing serenity rather than spectacle. In lore, Manaphy is known as the Prince of the Sea, a Pokemon said to be born from a single egg that drifts through the ocean. Its bond with the sea is so strong that it can form emotional connections with both Pokemon and humans, calming hostile waters and easing tension wherever it goes. The rarity of its shiny form mirrors this lore, as if the ocean itself only allows such a variant to exist on the rarest of occasions. Shiny Manaphy's reputation grew significantly as later generations introduced shiny locks for most mythical Pokemon. In Generation 5 and beyond, Manaphy was no longer obtainable in a way that allowed for shiny hunting. This permanently closed the window for legitimate shiny Manaphy acquisition, freezing the number of authentic examples in existence. Unlike other shinies that could be hunted indefinitely, shiny Manaphy became a finite collectible, increasing its prestige with every passing year. The difficulty of the hunt also created a strong sense of reverence within the shiny hunting community. Shiny Manaphy is often cited as a symbol of patience and commitment rather than luck. While many shinies can be obtained through persistence or optimized methods, shiny Manaphy demands preparation, knowledge, and acceptance of failure. It represents a time in Pokemon history when shiny hunting was less about efficiency and more about endurance. From a technical standpoint, shiny Manaphy remains one of the most fascinating cases in Pokemon mechanics. It is one of the only Pokemon whose shiny status is determined at hatching from an egg that originates in a completely different game. This cross-title interaction is unique and has never been replicated in the same way. It stands as a relic of an experimental era in Pokemon design, where interconnected systems created unexpected complexity. Today, legitimate shiny Manaphy are often housed in private collections, carefully preserved and rarely traded. Many collectors choose never to move them beyond Generation 4 or 5 to avoid any risk of data corruption or legitimacy questions. When one does appear publicly, it is usually accompanied by extensive documentation, screenshots, and transfer records to prove its authenticity. In discussions of the rarest shiny Pokemon ever, Shiny Manaphy consistently appears near the top of the list. Its rarity is not based solely on numbers, but on the sheer difficulty required to obtain it correctly. It is rare not because players could not find it, but because very few were willing to endure what the hunt demanded. As time passes and older hardware becomes harder to maintain, the possibility of obtaining new, legitimate shiny Manaphy grows increasingly remote. Pokemon Ranger cartridges age, DS systems become scarce, and fewer players have the means or patience to attempt the process. This makes every existing legitimate shiny Manaphy a preserved piece of Pokemon history, representing a moment when dedication outweighed convenience. In the quiet glow of its deep blue tones, Shiny Manaphy embodies the idea that some treasures are not meant to be chased easily. They exist for those willing to move slowly, to repeat the same path again and again, and to accept the sea's answer, whether it brings reward or silence. And in that way, Shiny Manaphy remains one of the most fitting mythical Pokemon to ever carry the title of rare. Shiny Shaman holds a special place among the rarest Pokemon ever hunted, not because of overwhelming difficulty alone, but because of how fleeting its opportunity was. Shaman itself is already a mythical Pokemon tied deeply to themes of gratitude, nature, and renewal, and its shiny form became one of the most elusive variations ever made legitimately obtainable. For a brief window in Pokemon Platinum, players were granted access to a quiet patch of land known as the Flower Paradise, a serene location at the very edge of the Sinnoh region. This area existed almost outside normal space, reachable only through a limited-time event item known as Oak's Letter. Oak's Letter was distributed for a short period and never permanently added to the game, meaning access to Shaman depended entirely on being present during that specific event window. Without it, the Flower Paradise simply did not exist. There was no alternate method, no post-game workaround, and no later redistribution in Platinum. This alone made Shaman rare, but hunting its shiny form elevated the challenge to an entirely different level. Unlike modern mythical encounters, Shaman was not shiny locked in Pokemon Platinum. That meant it could, in theory, appear in its shiny form, but only at full odds. At the time, full odds meant 1 in 8,192. There was no shiny charm, no Masuda method, and no overworld sparkle effects to indicate success. Each encounter required resetting the game and replaying the approach to Shaman again and again. The path itself was long, silent, and intentionally peaceful, with no distractions, no wild Pokemon, and no music changes to break the monotony. Every reset meant walking the same white path, lined with flowers, approaching the same small Pokemon, waiting quietly at the end. Unlike some shinies that are loud or dramatic, Shiny Shaman feels almost like a whisper, a rare, quiet variation meant to be noticed only by those patient enough to look closely. The difficulty of this hunt was compounded by how little room for error existed. Players often went thousands of resets without success, knowing that if they accidentally knocked Shaman out or saved after encountering a non-shiny version, the opportunity would be lost permanently on that save file. This created an unusual tension. Shaman is canonically gentle and kind, yet the act of hunting it demanded relentless persistence and emotional endurance. Many players describe the hunt as meditative at first, then exhausting, and finally surreal once success arrived. What truly elevated Shiny Shaman into legendary status was the fact that later games removed this possibility entirely. In Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Shaman became shiny locked. Even though Oak's Letter was redistributed years later, the chance to encounter a shiny version was gone. This cemented Pokemon Platinum as the only legitimate mainline game where Shiny Shaman could be obtained through intended mechanics without glitches. As time passed, untouched cartridges with valid event access became rarer, and so did legitimate Shiny Shaman. The cultural impact of Shiny Shaman is often overshadowed by flashier mythicals, but among collectors and longtime hunters, it is considered one of the purest examples of a true full odds mythical hunt. There were no shortcuts, no manipulation tricks, and no guarantees. It required patience, repetition, and trust that the odds would eventually align. Some players spent months resetting nightly, using Shaman's quiet encounter as part of their routine, the gentle background music looping endlessly as they waited for that rare color shift to appear. Another factor contributing to Shaman's rarity is its form change. While Shaman can transform into sky form under specific conditions, Shiny Shaman remains locked to its land form in Platinum during the initial encounter. This means the first and most iconic Shiny Shaman sighting is always the small, hedgehog-like form resting among flowers. That image, a turquoise shaman standing alone at the end of the world, has become symbolic among shiny hunters. From a legitimacy standpoint, Shiny Shaman is also one of the most scrutinized Pokemon in existence. Because it is so rare, many circulating versions are hacked or improperly generated. Legitimate specimens are typically traced back to original Platinum cartridges with verifiable event data. In competitive and collector spaces, a confirmed legitimate Shiny Shaman is treated with extreme respect, often considered more valuable than shinies with lower odds but higher visual impact. There is also something fitting about Shaman being this rare. As the Pokemon of gratitude, it rewards patience rather than force. The act of resetting thousands of times mirrors its lore's quiet persistence, leading to a moment of peace. When the shiny finally appears, the encounter feels less like winning and more like being acknowledged. Many players recall freezing when they saw the color difference, afraid to blink or press the wrong button, heart racing in complete silence. Even today, stories of Shiny Shaman hunts continue to circulate online. Some players completed the hunt in a few hundred resets. Others went well over 10,000. The randomness of the odds ensured that no two stories were alike. What they all shared, however, was the same quiet ending Shaman caught, saved carefully, and stored like a rare memory rather than just another Pokemon. In the broader history of shiny hunting, Shiny Shaman represents a moment before modern conveniences, a time when rarity was defined not by mechanics or tools, but by access and endurance. It stands as one of the clearest examples of how limited time events, full odds, and later shiny locks combine to create something truly irreplaceable. As the flower paradise fades into memory and newer generations move further away from Sinnoh's original design, Shiny Shaman remains frozen in time, a small turquoise figure at the edge of the world, waiting patiently for the few who were willing to walk the same path again and again, simply hoping for gratitude to shine back at them. Shiny Jirachi holds a unique place in Pokemon history, not only because of its rarity, but because of how unusually complicated its legitimate acquisition has always been. Unlike many mythical Pokemon that were distributed directly through in-game events, Jirachi's original availability was tied to real-world hardware, specific regional discs, and a very narrow window of opportunity. This alone makes even a normal Jirachi rare by modern standards, but a legitimate shiny Jirachi elevates that rarity to an entirely different level. For many collectors, it represents the pinnacle of difficult, legitimate shiny hunting. Jirachi was first introduced during Generation 3 alongside Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire as a mythical Pokemon said to awaken once every 1,000 years. In the lore, it grants wishes when the tags on its head are opened, but in reality, accessing Jirachi required something far more specific than a wish. In Japan, players could obtain Jirachi through the Pokemon Coliseum bonus disc, a special disc released exclusively in that region. This disc connected to Pokemon Ruby or Sapphire on the Game Boy Advance and allowed a single Jirachi to be transferred per save file. What makes this method so significant is that the Jirachi generated by the Japanese bonus disc was not shiny locked. That means every transfer had a natural chance of producing a shiny Jirachi at full Generation 3 odds, 1 in 8,192. There were no resets within the game itself. To try again, players needed an entirely new save file, a compatible console setup, and access to the physical disc. Each attempt required time, preparation, and hardware that many players outside Japan simply did not have. Adding to the difficulty, the Japanese bonus disc itself was produced in limited quantities and never released internationally. Western players had no official way to obtain this disc through retail, meaning anyone outside Japan would have needed to import it, along with a compatible GameCube, memory card, and Japanese copy of Pokemon Coliseum. Even then, the process was slow. One Jirachi per save file meant that each shiny attempt was effectively locked behind hours of setup. This turned shiny hunting Jirachi into one of the most time-consuming and resource-intensive hunts in Pokemon history. The rarity compounds further when considering how many legitimate shiny Jirachi actually exist. Many discs were used only once, as intended, with no concern for shininess. Others were lost, damaged, or never preserved properly. Unlike modern distributions that can be mass-claimed online, each shiny Jirachi from this method represents a deliberate, repeated effort by someone willing to go far beyond normal gameplay. As a result, most shiny Jirachi seen today are either illegitimate or cloned from a very small number of original, authentic sources. From a technical perspective, shiny Jirachi has another unique trait that distinguishes it from later shiny distributions. Its shiny coloration is subtle but iconic, shifting from its usual pale yellow to a slightly greener hue, while its star-shaped head ornaments remain vibrant. In Generation 3, shininess was determined by trainer ID and secret ID combinations rather than later methods, making verification even more complex. This complexity has made legitimate shiny Jirachi one of the most scrutinized Pokemon among collectors and legality researchers. Jirachi's wish-granting lore adds an ironic layer to its shiny status. In the Pokemon universe, it is said that wishes are only granted when Jirachi awakens, yet for players attempting to obtain its shiny form, no wish could bypass the odds. There were no tricks, no guaranteed encounters, and no shiny charm. Every attempt relied entirely on probability. This aligns almost poetically with Jirachi's theme, a Pokemon that promises miracles, yet demands patience beyond reason. In competitive terms, shiny Jirachi is indistinguishable from its non-shiny counterpart, which further reinforces that its value is not functional, but historical. Jirachi itself is known for its balanced stats and versatile move pool, often associated with serene grace strategies, but the shiny version does not perform any differently. Its worth lies entirely in what it represents, a moment in Pokemon history when events were scarce, hardware mattered, and shininess was never guaranteed. Over the years, later games introduced new Jirachi distributions, many of which were shiny locked. These locks effectively froze the possibility of legitimate shiny Jirachi acquisition moving forward, cementing the Japanese bonus disc method as the sole legitimate source. Once Generation 6 and beyond standardized shiny locks for mythical Pokemon, the door closed permanently. No future game has ever allowed shiny Jirachi to be hunted naturally again. Because of this, shiny Jirachi occupies a special tier even among rare shinies. It is not just rare because of odds, but because of circumstance. Hardware limitations, regional exclusivity, and time all work together to make it scarce. Each legitimate specimen is a relic from an era when Pokemon events felt mysterious and inaccessible, when owning a specific disc or attending a real-world distribution could define an entire collection. Collectors who possess legitimate shiny Jirachi often describe it as the centerpiece of their collection, not because it is flashy, but because of the story behind it. It represents dedication, patience, and a deep understanding of Pokemon history. In many ways, shiny Jirachi is less a Pokemon and more a living artifact, a reminder of how different the franchise once was. As the Pokemon series continues to evolve, with shinies becoming more accessible and events more global, shiny Jirachi remains untouched by modern convenience. It cannot be recreated, redistributed, or rehunted. It exists only as a product of a specific time, place, and method that will never return. And because of that, it remains one of the rarest shiny Pokemon ever legitimately obtainable. Shiny Diancie stands as one of the rarest legitimately obtainable shiny Pokemon ever released, not because of difficult odds or complex mechanics, but because of how incredibly limited its availability was. Unlike many other mythical Pokemon that at least had repeatable distributions or multiple regional events, Diancie's shiny form was tied to a very small number of official events, most of which occurred after shiny locks had already become standard for mythical Pokemon. This means there was never a way to hunt shiny Diancie through gameplay alone, and every legitimate example traces back to a narrow window in Pokemon history. Diancie itself was first introduced in Generation 6, debuting in Pokemon X and Y. As a mythical Pokemon related to Carbink, Diancie was portrayed as a rare mutation born deep within the earth, capable of creating diamonds instantaneously. From the moment it was revealed, Diancie was positioned as an elegant, almost royal Pokemon, with lore emphasizing both beauty and isolation. However, unlike earlier mythicals such as Mew or Jirachi, Diancie arrived during an era where Game Freak had already begun aggressively shiny locking event Pokemon to prevent exploitation and preserve rarity. For a significant period after Diancie's introduction, its shiny form was entirely unobtainable by any legal means. Every Diancie distributed through early events was shiny locked, and players assumed for years that shiny Diancie might never be released at all. This alone contributed to its mystique, as shiny hunters often cataloged it alongside permanently locked Pokemon like Victini or Keldeo. But unlike those Pokemon, Diancie's story took a sudden and unexpected turn. In 2015, the Pokemon Company released a single official shiny Diancie distribution tied to specific regions and promotional events. One of the most notable distributions occurred in Japan in connection with the Pokemon movie Hoopa and the Clash of Ages, where select attendees received shiny Diancie via serial code. Additional extremely limited distributions followed in South Korea and a small number of other regions, but these events were never global, never repeatable, and never extended. Crucially, shiny Diancie was never distributed in North America through standard online events, and many regions received no legitimate access at all. Even in countries where it was available, the distribution windows were short, often lasting only days or weeks. Miss the event, and the opportunity was gone forever. There was no later reissue, no anniversary rerun, and no alternate method introduced in later generations. Because Shiny Diancie was always event-based, there were no shiny odds involved in its acquisition. Every legitimate Shiny Diancie originated from a preset distribution, meaning there was no way to hunt it in the traditional sense. This paradoxically increases its rarity among collectors, because while the odds were technically 100% for those who received it, the number of people who ever had that chance was extraordinarily small. Another factor contributing to Shiny Diancie's rarity is its transfer limitations. Many early event Diancie distributions were locked to Generation 6 games, and while legitimate transfers forward are possible, not all players preserve their original files. Over time, lost cartridges, corrupted saves, and discontinued services further reduced the number of intact, verifiable Shiny Diancie remaining in circulation. Visually, Shiny Diancie is understated but distinct. Its pink gemstone tones shift to a softer, lighter coloration, giving it a pale, almost crystalline appearance. Unlike shinies that drastically alter color palettes, Diancie's shiny form leans into elegance rather than shock value. This subtlety makes it instantly recognizable to knowledgeable collectors while remaining invisible to casual observers, further reinforcing its status as a collector's Pokémon rather than a flashy trophy. Shiny Diancie also gained additional attention with the introduction of Mega Diancie, one of the few mythical Pokémon ever granted a Mega Evolution. While Mega Diancie itself could not be shiny independently of the base form, the existence of a shiny Mega Diancie made legitimate shiny examples even more desirable. Seeing a legitimate shiny Mega Diancie in battle became one of the clearest signals that a player either attended a rare event or obtained the Pokémon through an authenticated trade chain. In competitive and collector circles, Shiny Diancie occupies a unique tier. It is not rare because of low encounter odds, nor because of extreme mechanical difficulty like Shiny Manaphy. Instead, it is rare because time itself locked it away. If you were not present during a specific real-world moment, there is no way to recreate that opportunity. That kind of rarity cannot be farmed, hunted, or optimized. It can only be preserved. Today, legitimate Shiny Diancie are among the most scrutinized Pokémon in existence. Collectors carefully examine event dates, ribbons, regions, and transfer paths to verify authenticity. Because hacked versions are common, a verifiable Shiny Diancie with correct metadata is far rarer than most players realize. In many cases, even veteran collectors may go years without encountering a confirmed legitimate one. In the broader history of shiny Pokémon, Shiny Diancie represents the moment when rarity shifted from gameplay challenge to historical circumstance. It marks the transition from the era of full odds legendary hunts to an era where access itself became the limiting factor. For that reason, it stands alongside Pokémon like Shiny Mew and Shiny Jirachi as one of the defining symbols of true scarcity in the franchise. And as time continues to pass, Shiny Diancie only becomes rarer, not because the odds change, but because the world that created it no longer exists. Darkrai has always existed at the edge of the Pokémon world, a presence felt more often than seen, whispered about in stories rather than encountered directly. Unlike many mythical Pokémon that are celebrated or revered, Darkrai is remembered with caution. It does not seek conflict, yet its mere existence alters the emotional state of everything around it. In the lore of Sinnoh, Darkrai is associated with shadows, sleep, and dreams not because it desires to harm, but because its power naturally manifests through the subconscious mind. This distinction is important because Darkrai is not evil by design. Instead, it is misunderstood, isolated by an ability it cannot fully control. From the earliest records, Darkrai has been tied to nightmares. Pokédex entries consistently describe it as a Pokémon that induces terrifying dreams in people and Pokémon alike. However, the wording is deliberate. Darkrai does not feed on fear, nor does it hunt sleeping victims. Rather, nightmares follow it involuntarily, like a shadow cast by its presence. When Darkrai appears near settlements, people experience restless sleep, vivid dreams, and recurring visions. Over time, this led to the belief that Darkrai itself was malicious, when in truth, it was simply incompatible with peaceful human environments. This incompatibility explains why Darkrai often chooses isolation. In Sinnoh mythology, it is said to wander far from towns, preferring abandoned structures, desolate islands, or deep forests where no one sleeps nearby. One such location is New Moon Island, a place shrouded in perpetual darkness. The island appears empty at first glance, silent and untouched, yet it serves as Darkrai's refuge. The connection between Darkrai and New Moon Island is not symbolic, it is practical. The island allows Darkrai to exist without unintentionally harming others through its dream-altering presence. The contrast between Darkrai and Cresselia is one of the most important relationships in Pokémon lore. While Darkrai brings nightmares unintentionally, Cresselia restores pleasant dreams and emotional balance. In ancient Sinnoh legends, the two are described as opposing forces, yet not enemies. Instead, they represent equilibrium within sleep itself, fear and comfort, darkness and relief. When Darkrai's presence overwhelms an area, Cresselia is said to appear, healing those afflicted by nightmares and restoring calm. This dynamic reinforces the idea that Darkrai is not meant to be destroyed or feared, but balanced. Darkrai's design reflects this isolation. Its form is ghostly and incomplete, resembling a living shadow pulled from the edge of reality. The white plume extending from its head looks almost like fog or smoke, constantly shifting, never settling into a fixed shape. Its body fades into darkness, lacking clear limbs or features, giving the impression that it is not fully anchored to the physical world. Even its single visible eye glows with a muted intensity, watchful rather than aggressive. Everything about Darkrai suggests restraint power held inward, never unleashed recklessly. In battle, Darkrai's abilities mirror its lore. Its signature move, Dark Void, induces sleep, reinforcing its connection to dreams rather than direct damage. Unlike many mythical Pokémon that overwhelm opponents with raw strength, Darkrai disables and controls the battlefield, forcing others into vulnerability without striking first. Its high speed and special attack make it dangerous when provoked, but its moveset reflects manipulation rather than destruction. This aligns perfectly with its narrative role, a Pokémon that affects perception, not reality. Darkrai's role in the Pokémon anime further deepened its tragic image. In its featured movie, Darkrai is shown actively trying to protect a city from spatial collapse caused by forces far beyond its control. Despite being blamed for disasters and feared by humans, it repeatedly places itself in danger to save others. The story makes it clear that Darkrai understands how it is perceived, yet continues to act selflessly regardless. This portrayal cemented Darkrai as one of the most emotionally complex Pokémon ever created, not a villain, but a misunderstood guardian. From a gameplay perspective, Darkrai's availability has always been extremely limited. In Pokémon Platinum, players could only encounter Darkrai by using the member card, an event item distributed for a short time. Without this item, New Moon Island remained inaccessible, permanently locking Darkrai out of normal gameplay. Even with access, Darkrai was encountered at full shiny odds, with no modifiers, no shiny charm, and no shortcuts. This alone made shiny Darkrai extraordinarily rare. What elevates shiny Darkrai into the upper tier of rarity is what happened later. In subsequent generations, Darkrai became shiny locked, meaning it could no longer be hunted legitimately in modern games. This effectively froze the number of legal shiny Darkrai in existence. Every legitimate shiny Darkrai must originate from that narrow window of time in Pokemon Platinum obtained with a limited distribution item at full odds by players willing to soft reset endlessly for a subtle color change. That color change itself is understated. Shiny Darkrai does not dramatically alter its palette. Instead, its black body takes on a deep charcoal and purple tone, and its red accents shift slightly, creating a softer, more muted contrast. The change is easy to miss, especially in older game graphics, making successful shiny hunts even more challenging. Players could easily encounter shiny Darkrai without realizing it, reset out of habit, and lose it forever. This subtlety adds another layer of difficulty to an already punishing hunt. The rarity of shiny Darkrai is compounded by legitimacy concerns. Because Darkrai is so popular, many hacked versions circulate online, distinguishing real, event-legitimate shiny Darkrai from illegitimate ones requires detailed knowledge of origin games, encounter locations, dates, and move legality. As a result, verified legitimate shiny Darkrai are prized not just for their scarcity, but for the certainty of their authenticity. Each one represents hours of patience, perfect timing, and historical opportunity that can never be repeated. Collectors often place shiny Darkrai alongside shiny Manaphy and shiny Jirachi in terms of prestige. Unlike random shiny encounters, these Pokemon demand preparation before the hunt even begins. Missing the event means missing the chance entirely. For Darkrai, this means that new players can never legitimately obtain one through gameplay alone. Its rarity is fixed in time, preserved as a relic of an earlier era in Pokemon history. Darkrai's legacy continues to grow precisely because it is unreachable. It exists as a reminder of how Pokemon once handled mystery limited access, hidden islands, rumors passed between players, and events that felt genuinely special. Darkrai wasn't just a Pokemon you caught, it was a story you uncovered, a secret you earned. That feeling is preserved within every legitimate shiny Darkrai still in existence. There is something fitting about that. A Pokemon associated with dreams, shadows, and isolation remains forever just out of reach, accessible only to those who were present at the right moment and willing to endure the longest nights of resetting. Shiny Darkrai embodies the idea of rarity not as spectacle, but as patience, rewarded quietly, in darkness, long after most players have given up. And somewhere, on a quiet island beneath a moonless sky, Darkrai continues to wander alone, not to bring fear, but to exist without disturbing others. Its presence is silent, its power restrained, its story unfinished. In the world of rare shiny Pokemon, Darkrai stands as one of the most elusive figures ever created, not because it hides, but because time itself has moved on without it. Shiny Arceus stands not merely as one of the rarest Pokemon, but as a legendary paradox in the franchise, the Alpha Pokemon, whose most desirable form was, for over a decade, rendered functionally impossible to obtain by legitimate means. Its rarity is less about low odds and more about the historical decision to bury the opportunity entirely. While other mythicals were difficult due to time-limited items or regional discs, Arceus was locked behind an event item that Game Freak created, but then, in a unique and frustrating twist of fate, never actually released to the public in its original Generation 4 games. In the lore of the Sinnoh region, Arceus is the creator of the Pokemon universe, the primordial being from which Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina were born. It resides in the Hall of Origin, a serene, celestial location high above the Spear Pillar, a space meant only for the Alpha. Access to this realm was conditional, tied to a special item called the Azure Flute. This key item was coded into the data of Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, allowing a player to trigger a unique encounter at the Hall of Origin. The sequence was epic and fitting for a deity. The player would play the flute, and a dazzling staircase would emerge from the clouds, leading directly to Arceus. However, the Azure Flute event was officially cancelled. It was never distributed globally, nor was it ever issued in Japan, leaving the Hall of Origin sealed and the encounter inaccessible through standard, intended gameplay. This single, critical decision immediately made any Hall of Origin Arceus obtained in the Generation 4 games impossible to verify as legitimate without the use of external devices or exploits to inject the item. This is the first layer of its rarity. The creator Pokemon was never meant to be caught by the player in its debut games. It was only meant to be received through direct distribution. The tragedy for shiny hunters of the era was that, like Shaman and Darkrai, the static in-game encounter in the Hall of Origin was not shiny locked in Generation 4. If a player were to use an exploit like the notorious tweaking glitch or an action replay device to trigger the Azure Flute event and reach the Hall of Origin, the Arceus waiting there would have a chance of being shiny at the standard Generation 4 full odds, 1 in 8,192. This possibility hung over the community for years. The perfect, legitimate shiny Arceus was technically available within the game's code, but the official key to unlock it was kept hidden. As a result, any shiny Arceus originating from the Hall of Origin in Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum is perpetually shrouded in legitimacy concerns. While the resulting Pokemon's data can look perfect matching the correct encounter location, level, and original game data, the simple fact that the player had to use non-standard means to access the encounter in the first place casts a permanent shadow on its authenticity. This created a new kind of rarity, the scarcity of verifiable origin. A true collector could never be 100% certain that the player who caught it didn't use an illicit method to warp to the location or inject the flute, even if the resultant shiny was generated using the game's normal random number mechanics. Shiny Arceus itself is one of the most visually stunning transformations in the franchise, perfectly befitting its title as the Alpha Pokemon. Its normal coloration is predominantly white, with a gray underside and a golden cross-like wheel attached to its body. When it appears in its shiny form, the primary white body shifts to a luminous metallic gold, while its hooves and the accents on its cross-like wheel turn a vibrant darker bronze or red. This change is dramatic and unmistakable. The white body of the creator is replaced with the color of prestige, holiness, and power, transforming it from a neutral, ethereal presence into a brilliant, golden deity. Unlike the subtle shifts of Shiny Mew or Shiny Celebi, Shiny Arceus's coloration is a loud declaration, ensuring that no player could possibly soft reset past it. This bold visual design only amplified the desire to hunt it, making the unreleased Azure Flute event an even more painful omission in the history of the franchise. Since the in-game encounter was inaccessible, most legitimate shiny Arceus circulating today trace their origin not to the Hall of Origin, but to extremely limited official event distributions. These events were few, far between, and often regionally exclusive, particularly in Japan. For instance, a special Arceus distribution was held in Japan in 2015 inches connection with a Pokemon movie. Crucially, this event offered a chance for the distributed Arceus to be shiny, meaning players could soft reset the mystery gift process to try for the shiny version. Because this was a direct, guaranteed, and repeatable opportunity, though still requiring event attendance or codes, it provided the first unequivocally legitimate source for a shiny Arceus. However, even these event distributions carry a unique rarity factor. They were almost always level 100 and came in a Cherish Ball with a specific classic ribbon. This makes them distinguishable from a potentially legitimate, low-level Arceus caught in the Hall of Origin, forcing collectors to choose between the purest form in-game encounter, dubious legitimacy, and the verified form event distribution, guaranteed legitimacy, but not a hunt. The narrative surrounding Shiny Arceus was permanently altered by the release of Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, BDSP, on the Nintendo Switch. In a major move, the developers finally made the Azure Flute event item legitimately available to players as a bonus for having saved data from Pokémon Legends, Arceus. This monumental decision, over a decade after the item was originally designed, reopened the door to the Hall of Origin. Crucially, the Arceus encounter at Spear Pillar in BDSP was programmed to be not shiny locked, meaning players could finally, truly, and legitimately hunt shiny Arceus at full $1, $4,096 odds, the modern base rate. This reintroduction has two primary impacts on its rarity. First, the hunt is real. For the first time, a legitimate in-game caught shiny Arceus can exist without relying on external devices or exploits. The hunt is an endurance test. Save in front of the creator, initiate the battle, check for the golden flash, and reset. The soft resetting process in BDSP is still lengthy, and at $1, $4,096 odds, a hunt can easily surpass 10,000 resets, demanding months of dedication. Second, the Generation 4 relic still holds prestige. While the BDSP Shiny Arceus is legitimate, it does not diminish the prestige of the legendary Generation 4 Hall of Origin catch. The Generation 4 version remains an artifact, a Pokémon that was only theoretically catchable, now sitting alongside the confirmed legitimate versions. The debate shifts from, is it possible, to is it from the original timeline? In the modern context, Shiny Arceus represents the ultimate full odds quest. It lacks the convenient breeding mechanics of regular Pokémon and the odds boosts of the shiny charm in this specific scenario. It demands a significant time investment just to unlock the encounter, followed by a hunt that pushes the limits of player patience, often described as an act of devotion to the god of Pokémon. Shiny Arceus now symbolizes the completion of the mythical hunt cycle. It is the final prize, the one that was promised but withheld for so long. Its value is measured not just in its brilliant golden appearance, but in the years the community waited, the lines of code that kept it hidden, and the immense effort now required to retrieve it from the Hall of Origin. It remains a crowning achievement, a golden deity earned through a trial of pure, unyielding dedication. Shiny Poipole occupies a very modern, yet still intensely limited, space in the pantheon of rare shiny Pokémon. Unlike the Generation 3 and 4 mythicals, whose rarity was defined by unreleased items and full odds, Poipole's scarcity is purely a product of event distribution mechanics and a very narrow window of opportunity. It represents a shift in how Game Freak controlled rarity, not by making the hunt hard, but by making access exclusive and non-repeatable. Poipole itself is an ultra beast, an extraterrestrial Pokémon that entered the Pokémon world through an ultra wormhole. It was first introduced in Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon USU. As an Ultra Beast, it already possesses a unique origin story, but its shiny form carries a different kind of prestige. In the original USUM games, Poipole was acquired as a static encounter after the player completes a certain story segment. This specific encounter was, however, shiny locked, meaning the Poipole you caught during the main story could never be shiny. This immediately forced its shiny variant into the realm of event distributions. For several years, shiny Poipole was entirely unobtainable. This began to change in 2018 with a specific, extremely limited event distribution. The Pokémon was distributed as a mystery gift for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon players, primarily across North America and Europe, usually requiring players to pick up a code from participating retail stores like GameStop. This distribution defined shiny Poipole's rarity. Crucially, the Pokémon was distributed ready-made in its shiny form. There were no odds, no soft resets, and no hunting involved. Every player who successfully obtained the event received the shiny version. This means the rarity of shiny Poipole is not measured by the probability of $1, $4,096, or $1, $8,192, but by the number of codes distributed and redeemed. Because the distribution was tied to physical retail codes, it suffered from several limitations. The codes were often scarce, stores ran out quickly, and players in rural or international areas often had no way to participate at all. This made its rarity a matter of geographic and temporal constraint. If you lived in the wrong country or missed the single week the codes were available, the opportunity was gone forever. The distribution also had strict compatibility rules, being locked only to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. This narrow focus immediately excluded anyone who only owned the earlier Sun and Moon titles, further restricting the potential population of legitimate shiny Poipole owners. The combination of region lock, store exclusivity, and game lock created an incredibly small pool of legitimate specimens. Visually, shiny Poipole is a stunning transformation. Its usual predominantly purple and black coloration shifts to a vibrant white and yellow, making it look like a futuristic crystalline entity. The change is dramatic and instantly noticeable, a stark contrast to its standard dark palette. This bright, clean appearance only heightened the desire for the event, as it is one of the most visually impressive shiny transformations in the Ultra Beast category. Furthermore, Poipole evolves into Naganadel, which is also a popular Ultra Beast in competitive play. Obtaining a legitimate shiny Poipole means having access to a legitimate shiny Naganadel, which retains the same white and yellow aesthetic, granting the Pokémon immense value in both collector and competitive communities. The shiny Naganadel, with its golden stinger and white body, is equally as recognizable and prestigious. From a legitimacy standpoint, shiny Poipole is heavily scrutinized, but for different reasons than Arceus or Mew. Since it originated as a guaranteed event gift, legitimate shiny Poipole must meet very precise criteria. It must be in a cherished ball, have the correct classic ribbon, match the exact level and moveset of the distribution, and bear the correct Wonder Card data from the event date. Any discrepancy almost certainly signals an illegitimate version. The sheer number of improperly generated shiny Poipoles circulating online makes a verified, event-legitimate one highly prized. It is a modern litmus test for collectors, a shiny that should only exist under one specific set of historical conditions. In the history of rare shinies, shiny Poipole represents the ultimate example of artificial, controlled scarcity. Game Freak could have distributed it widely, but they chose to tie it to a physically limited, time-sensitive process. Its rarity isn't due to a mathematical roll of the dice. It's due to a marketing decision that created an exclusive, non-huntable treasure. For collectors, it stands as a perfect digital artifact, a token of a specific place, time, and promotional campaign that will never be repeated. Its existence is a quiet reminder that in modern Pokemon, sometimes the rarest thing is simply access,